Hi, I'm C.Steven Manley, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O, Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
C.Steven Manley.
author interviews with the very best folks in publishing today. Whether it's indie, traditional publishing, hybrid, no matter what, we talk to them all from all across the spectrum of genre to bring you the very best in the craft of writing. It's because of our great sponsors that we're able to bring you these excellent shows, and I'd like to thank some of those sponsors today. If you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com and there's a link in the menu that says advertise. Click on that and you can help sponsor the show as well. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, my very favorite monthly publication. If you want that old pulp magazine feel that you used to get when you were a kid, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is the book for you. They're up to episode 19 now, the Halloween issue, and you're going to love it. Each month features a different set of writers bringing you the best in weird, pulpy stories. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Go pick it up today. From my friend Nick Breaker, Essence, Book 1, Septima. Nick Breaker is one of the best science fiction writers out there today, and this new series that he's working on is crazy good. It mixes urban fantasy and science fiction and extraterrestrials in a great mix that delivers a story that's adventure with a little steamy and guaranteed to keep you glued to the page. Essence, Book 1, Septima by Nick Breaker. Go pick it up today. ThirdScribe.com is the place to go if you love books, or if you're a writer and want to connect with other writers, or you want to find readers for your books. ThirdScribe.com can help you get started. You can join for free and meet some of your favorite writers, or you can set up a basic author website for free, and then there's multiple levels of help and support that you can get from ThirdScribe.com. I love these guys. I love what they're doing. Go visit ThirdScribe.com today and let Rob and the good folks help you get started. Also, Chronicle World's B-Movie is the latest Future Chronicles edition, book 16 in the Future Chronicles. This book is awesome, and it's been climbing up the charts since it released just this past week. Mummies and giant robots, werewolves and killer koalas, plague creatures and demonic clowns. They're coming, they're hungry, and they're not human intolerant. In this title, in the acclaimed Future Chronicles series of speculative fiction anthologies created by award-winning author Samuel Peralta, the destination is the B-Movie, the realm of the outlandish and the macabre, the strange and the unexpected. Go pick up B-Movie, Chronicle Worlds today. Thanks to all our sponsors. At the end of the show, as always, we're going to have a audio clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to bring a show to you with C.Steven Manley, also known as Chuck Manley. That's what most people online call him. That's what the C stands for. It's Chuck. So for conversation purposes, I'm going to refer to him as Chuck, but you probably know him professionally as C.Steven Manley. Chuck is an awesome guy that I have recently gotten to know better, and that's one of the things I love about this podcast is a lot of the new old friends that I get to make, people that I become acquainted with, and it feels like that we've just known each other for a long, long time, and Chuck has become one of those guys, and I think we have a similar offbeat sense of humor, and that goes a long way. So welcome to the show, Chuck.
Hey, Hank, it is a genuine pleasure to be here, man. I've been listening for quite a while now, so.
Oh, thank you. And I have been listening to you for quite a while as well, and we're going to dig into that in just a little bit, because Chuck is also a podcaster, as you can hear by his velvet pipes ringing through on the other side. But you know, Chuck, we can't go anywhere until we get this first question out of the way. And that first question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a
I'm ready
writer.
for you, brother.
I know you are, because I've listened to Story Shots episode 1. But what's your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, for this particular tale, you're going to have to set your mental wayback machine to about 1975, 1976, I think. And I was in, oh gosh, fourth grade. I was living in Pasadena, Texas, and it was this time of year, Halloween season, and my teacher gave us an assignment to write a short story centered around the Halloween holiday. So I decided to write one called The Ghost Town, since we lived in Texas, and there were, you hear about the Old West ghost towns and stuff. So I wrote this story where my class took a field trip to this ghost town, and everyone but me disappeared, and I was the lone hero left to save the day and find out what happened to everybody. And I wrote it, and it was four pages handwritten, I think. And my teacher read it, and she liked it so much that she read it to the class, and they loved it. And then so she took it to the other fourth grade class, and that teacher read it her class, and then they took it to the principal, and he liked it so much that he put it up on the little cork board outside the lunchroom there. And so it hung up till after the Halloween holiday was over. And, that just made young me feel like just a straight up rock star. So ever since then, I've been telling stories. I went from that to writing these Hardy Boys style mysteries in those little black and white primers they gave us back then, with me and my best friend as the main characters, and all sorts. And they were great because, I'm writing about these 9-10-year-old kids solving mysteries, and like one of them I remember particularly was called the Mermaid Mystery, and we were down in Galveston for some reason, and there were these mermaids robbing ships, and I proved to the police that the mermaids were robots by snatching a pistol out of the police's holster and shooting a hole in the robot to show all the sparks and things flying out of it. So that gives you the kind of idea, the kind of things I was writing when I was about 10. But that's pretty much it. I've had the bug since then, 40 plus years later.
So at age 10, you were writing true crime?
Pretty much, yeah. That's what it was. Yeah, absolutely. It's all, I'm not allowed. There's some NDAs and things attached. I'm not allowed to discuss these cases. But yeah, true crime. Right. That's what it was.
Yeah, and with the JFK files that are just coming out, and redacted. You never know. This stuff may come out. You never know.
My superhero youth may come to light finally.
That's right. Chuck, there's a common thread on a lot of shows that I do where a teacher or someone at school or a parent it really sees that storytelling gift and goes out of their way to do something small. It probably seems to the teacher something small, and it makes a life-changing impact on the kid, kind of like you had. And we're working on something here at the podcast to try to help. We can't really talk about it because we're still in the planning stages and working with some people to get it off the ground. But we hope to help encourage some young people to be writers and storytellers as well. That had to have a huge impact on you when getting your story put out there like a rock star, like you said.
Oh, it absolutely did. Now, the flip side of that particular coin, though, is that as much as my teacher enjoyed the writing and as much as I loved just losing myself in those worlds and writing them, I did not really get any kind of heavy. I was actively discouraged at home from writing that sort of thing. It's just the home culture I had, the generation my parents came up in, that sort of thing. They actively would try to stop me from doing it. And I didn't actually get a lot of encouragement until I was in my late teens, early 20s when I was in the Air Force. And there was one night in a shop. I was working the night shift, and I'm sitting there using the shop computer not computer. Back then it was still an electric IBM Selectric typewriter. But I'm writing this little short story I had in mind, and one of my sergeants walks in, and he sees what I'm doing. He doesn't care. But he's like, "What are you doing?" I told him. He said, "Well, let me read it." And he read it, and then he handed it back to me. He looks me dead in the eye, And he says, "Don't ever stop doing this. This is who you are." And then he just walks out of the shop. And I was like, "Okay, Sarge, whatever you say, man."
That's awesome. Any idea what you were writing at the time?
Oh, I think that was, I was in a big epic fantasy phase at the time. I think that one, if I remember correctly, it was about a guy trying to rescue this winged beautiful lady from something. Somebody had imprisoned her or something. I don't remember, but it was a straight up fantasy adventure kind of thing. I have a rule that I use whenever I'm working on something. And that is, fun is rule one. I mean, there may be a little darkness to the story depending on what I'm working on, but it's always got to have some heart, some humor, and some spectacle. You know, it can be dark, but there's going to be some jokes too, and you know, there's going to be some excitement. There's going to be some kind of emotional moments. You know, I try to make everything as entertaining as possible, because I think I'm not looking to figure out the human condition with my work. I don't write heavy literary stuff, but I always think about that kid I was talking about who wrote that short story back when I was little. I'm writing for that person who wants to pick up a book and just forget about the craziness of reality for an hour or three. You know, just escapism. I'm a drug dealer. Escapism is what I'm pitching. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, but I've read your work, Chuck, and you know, I fully appreciate what you're saying. I really do. But
this should be good.
Your view of the human condition is going to bleed out into what you write. It's just, there's no way to avoid it. So you're writing entertainment, you're writing escapism, which I fully endorse. But you know, to just pass it off as just that is, is selling yourself a little short, because you definitely have something to say, and it comes out in your writing.
That. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what I'm trying to say is a lot of stuff you read.
You don't have an agenda.
They've got an agenda. They're trying to make a statement. They're trying to beat you over the head with truth or whatever. Right. And I'm not, it's going to bleed in. Your personality is always going to bleed into what you write. You can't help that. So I want to make it fun to read. And then afterwards, it kind of occurs to you, hey, there's something there that I might want to think about a little bit, but I don't want it to be obvious at the outset.
Yeah. Well, Nick Cole and Jason Onspach and I had this great conversation about that when we talked about Galaxy's Edge. It's been a couple months ago now.
Oh, those are great.
They're fantastic. And, we were talking about putting the fun back in science fiction. And,
Absolutely.
Nobody fell in love with Star Wars because they thought that George Lucas had some, treatise on, the human condition. It's, we understood friendship and, adventure and all of the great things we took from that. But you know what? We fell in love with it because we all wanted to be Luke Skywalker, swinging across with a lightsaber,
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was the fun.
It was.
It's the fun, it's the adventure. And, yes, if you look hard enough at Star Wars, you'll see statements about things like fascism and stuff like that. But, it's not really, that's not the tip of the lightsaber, so to speak.
Right. Well, especially the newer ones are,
absolutely.
More statement heavy, but,
absolutely.
I think we all understand what real Star Wars is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
Yeah. And I fully expect the comments to come flowing in on that.
I'll let them,
yeah,
man.
Let them.
That's what.
The epic fantasy, that you are writing, why do you think so many writers, begin or at least go through an epic fantasy stage? There have been so many writers on the show, some of them, with a very literary bent, some of them, writing mysteries and thrillers, and, everybody starts with elves and orcs and wizards at some point, it seems like.
I'm going to lay that at the feet of two cultural phenomenons, the first being Lord of the Rings, and then all the fantasy literature that flowed out from that, Terry Brooks, Stephen R. Donaldson. I mean, just the list goes on and on as far as the epic fantasy. So there's a lot of young people that that's sort of their first fun reads. That's the first thing they sort of go to as far as, okay, this is the best kind of escapism. And there's just so much of it. The other thing I think is the tabletop role playings, it's the D&D and stuff like that kicked off when we were kids. I think that inspired a lot of people to just sort of get lost in those worlds. And when they kind of maybe outgrew the games, they went looking for things to read that would remind them of that. And then that's where you've got this plethora of fantasy literature. And, you tend to write what you like to read. So I think it just all kind of grew out of that.
Yeah. Right before we started recording, you and I were geeking out about Stranger Things season 2. And we were talking about, that first episode of season 1 where, it opens with the kids sitting around playing D&D. And we were like, yep, these are my people.
That's it. I'm all in. I'm all in.
So many, cultural, touch points there, but so much that resonates with people like you and I and the people that like the kind of genre stuff that we do and yes, write the kind of stuff we do. Were you a D&D head back in the day?
Oh, dude, I got started in, I guess it was about 85 with first edition D&D, and I was an active weekly GM until about 3 years ago. And even now, I run like every month or 6 weeks. I'll run little one shots for my friends around here. One guy actually moved away from here, and his idea of a going away party was he wanted me to run like a pulp era Indiana Jones style adventure for him.
Oh,
so I am a lifelong gamer. I've played D&D and Hero System. My current go-to system is Savage Worlds for pretty much anything. I've played so many games I couldn't even name them all through the Air Force and my first marriage, everything. I'm a lifelong gamer.
That is so cool. When I was born in 71, so about the time that tabletop gaming was really kind of, went nuclear, was also when, the satanic scare of everything happened. And
yeah, I remember.
And
Believe me, I remember.
Oh yeah. And if you live in small town Mississippi and where church is culture, and you live in a hyper religious household like I did, I didn't get to play games much, but all of my friends did, and I could, I knew everything about it, and I kind of gamed vicariously through my friends until I was able to get out and do it myself.
I was actually thrown out of another kid's house. I lived in a little town called Grant, and actually not far from where I live now, but I went over to a kid's house one day to kind of introduce him to the game, and his mother actually called me a devil worshiper and threw me out of her house.
Yeah.
That small town Alabama is not all that different from small town Mississippi.
No, they're probably pretty much the same. But there's this great tradition of, cooperative storytelling, that is tabletop gaming. That's, what, I think that's the thing that these people missed is that, it's not even a game so much as it's a group of people telling a story together.
Right.
What do you think, what kind of impact do you think that had on you creatively, getting into tabletop gaming and immersing yourself in that?
It's like you said, it's really just another storytelling medium. When I sit down to write a book, I create the protagonist, the antagonist, all the characters, and I come up with the setting and I come up with the problem and all that. When you're running a game as the game master, the idea is for you to come up with the setting and the situation, and then your players, they create their characters, and then you insert them into that situation, and how they react to the situation and you reacting to them reacting is where the plot and everything comes from. In a lot of ways, that is very similar to straight up discovery writing. If you go in without a plot, without a plan, an outline, whatever, you're just kind of seeing what comes out of your own head. And really the biggest difference is just, it's not just your head when you're gaming. And I think what that did for me as far as being a writer goes is it allowed me to be open to just whatever, because you never know what a player is going to do to screw with the idea that you have for your plot or your story. So you have to be ready to juke and jive and come up with stuff on the fly to adjust to try and keep the game on track. And it's the same way if you're rewriting. You never know what's going to pop out of your head. A lot of people will tell you the characters kind of take over and just do what they want. And I think that being a gamer has sort of lubricated mental muscles enough that if my characters suddenly say, hey, this would be a good idea, I can actually take that and really consider how that would work in the context of whatever I'm writing. So they definitely play into each other a lot.
You said that you even played in the military. Was there a kind of a big culture there of gamers?
There was. I didn't have like a regular game because I was on a lot of TDYs and stuff while I was enlisted. But the nice thing about the military was whenever I connected with a game group, they tended to not just be playing D&D. I learned one of my favorite systems was called Hero System, and I learned that when I was in the Air Force. And I played another game called Paranoia. And whatever group I hooked up with, I would learn this new thing and the different storytelling methods that particular rule set allowed. So it was just those were kind of like whenever you could get in there and where you happened to be at the time.
You have described yourself as a bit of a human Swiss Army knife that going through life collecting skills. I like to think of myself as that a little bit. That there's a great shortage of Renaissance men who can go chop wood and then change a tire, maybe even fix brakes, sit down, tell a story, and cook dinner and take care of laundry if you have to. And there's going through life collecting different skills and experiences, I think makes you a better rounded storyteller. When you left school, what did you think you would do for the rest of your life?
Well, when I left high school, that's kind of weird because I left home at 15 under duress. So I managed through some circumstances and stuff to finish high school. And then like 2 weeks after graduation, I was in basic training. But I didn't really, I never wanted to be just one thing. I knew these guys, I'd hear these older guys talking and they'd say, oh, I worked at the cotton mill for 40 years and I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd had time for that. I wish I could have gone here, whatever. And I'm like, I didn't see the wisdom in just locking yourself into one thing and then hitting the point where you've got more life behind you than ahead of you and saying, I wish. And so, I went into the military with kind of an exploratory mindset of, okay, let's see. I'm going to go looking for what I love. And when I find what I love, I'm going to live for it. So I ended up doing the service. I got out of the service. I did a few jobs after that. I found I had an affinity for healthcare. I ended up in healthcare. And I think I stuck with that longer than I stuck with anything. But even then, I was always looking for I started out in psychiatric care. And that was fun for a while. So I kind of got over that. And I got into cardiac trauma care. And then, and I was always moving around. So I didn't really have a plan, to be honest. I was more of an adventurer, I guess you could say. I was always looking at the next thing, I
like that. Did any great stories come out of being door-to-door jewelry salesman?
Oh, wow. I did that for about a month. And
that's all you could take with it.
It was. I'm not a sales guy. That's actually one of the biggest hurdles I have right now with the indie author thing is I'm not a businessman. I discovered that early on. I just don't have the kind of numbers and stuff. And when it comes to like sales and going for the ask and all that, my inner introvert jumps up and throttles me. I mean, it's just terrible. But I do have one story from that. It was during my training with this company, and this woman was just driving me and this lady down the road. And we would just stop at every door we came to. We'd just kind of stop. And it wasn't like private residences. It was businesses that we'd go into trying to get them to display the jewelry in the business. And we come up on this one place. It's out on this old country road, not far from Huntsville. But she says, all right, Chuck, this one's yours. I get out. It looks like a gas station. There are gas pumps out front. There are signs in the door for like Coca-Cola and whatever. And I just got my little display thing, and I throw open the door, and I start reciting from the script without really even looking at the room. And about halfway through the script, I notice there's a guy who's probably in his late teens sitting over here watching television. There's a woman at a stove, like stirring a pot, doing something. And then there's this other like younger girl just kind of standing there staring at me. And these poor people were they were like the stereotypical Southern dirt farmer type. And it was obvious that I had walked into this to where they live. This wasn't a store. This was their house. It just looked like a store from the outside.
Oh, man.
So I'm standing there like pitching this stuff, and I'm just kind of like, and they're all just staring at me like I'm an insane person. And I got through my spiel, and I'll never forget that lady just looked at me and said, "Ain't nothing but broke folks here, son." And I said, "Yes, ma'am," and I got the hell out.
Oh.
I think that was the beginning of the end of my sales career right there.
Yeah, I suck at that stuff too. I hate it. With a passion. But oh man, that's awesome. Chuck, at what point did you? Well, when the Sarge told you that this is what you should be doing, that was fairly early on, I assume. Did you keep writing throughout all of your adventures, or did you put it on the shelf for a while?
Well, it's kind of ironic I say that I never wanted to be just one thing, but in the last few years I've realized I've always been a writer. Whenever I needed to relax, I'd pull out a notebook and a pen. It just never really clicked with me. And like I said, when I was young, I was actively discouraged from it. At one point, an authority figure in my life took my little black marble tablets with my little stories in them and burned them.
Oh,
That's how adamant these folks were that I not write. So I had a lot of that residue in my head that there's no point in this. It's just something I kind of do for secret. But once I got over that and I started trying to get published, I reached a point where I was doing the whole submission rejection dance in the 80s and 90s, and I met an actual author who had just gotten his first deal, and he started filling me in on what the actual contracts were really like. And I just, I loved writing, I loved telling stories, but like I said, the business thing didn't appeal to me. So I actually took a break. I guess it was the late 90s, early part of the 2Ks, where I had found a gaming group and I was just writing stuff for them all the time. And I was happy with that. I could write a little scenario for my game, or I could write a story to go with the game to sort of fill them in on what happened and, backstory kind of stuff. And they would read it and they would love it. And they'd say, "Man, this is great. Thank you." And, that little bit of recognition was fine for me. And then it was in 2014, a buddy of mine, he said, "Hey, Chuck, there's this anthology that I think you should submit to." And he told me about it. It was a vampire thing. I submitted to it and promptly got rejected. And but during the course of doing that, I discovered KDP. I'd been out of the publishing loop for so long, I had no idea what a Kindle even was. So after I discovered that and realized I could do it myself, man, it was off to the races, and I hadn't looked back since.
Yeah. I like the way that you said that you look back and you realize that you were always a writer. And that's one reason I like to get people to talk about. A lot of people have a circuitous path to writing because we all have to figure out how to make a living when we get out on our own and start making our own path. But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact that we are writers. And the career path you choose defines so many of us in the society we live in today. And the fact is, most of the time storytellers are born, and then you find a way to learn how to be a writer. And the career path you choose most of the time has very little to do with that. And
I think that in a lot of people's cases, there's who you are and then there's what you do.
Right.
And a lot of writers I know, they do other things to pay the bill. You do what you have to so you can do what you want to do. And if you want to write, you do what you have to keep the food on the table and the lights on so that you can actually do what you love doing. So I think it's most people in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So you discovered KDP, and so did you self-publish that vampire story?
Actually, that vampire story is in my most recent release, Walking World. It's called Steak Night.
Nice.
And it's a fun one I wrote. It's actually a combination of vampire story and an idea I had for an urban fantasy series that I don't know if it'll ever pan out or not. But yeah, it just recently got published like 6 weeks ago, I think. But no, my first foray into KDP was with the Paragon's trilogy, and it's kind of a mashup of it's like X-Men meets Hellboy. It's got a little superhero stuff in it without the capes and cowls and masks and all that, but it's got a little superhero stuff. It's got a little horror. It's got a little science fiction-y, fringe science kind of stuff. It's in retrospect, it was such a genre mashup. I kind of wish I'd written something a little more narrow first, but I'm really proud of those 3 books, and they're just a fun read. I think they do have a little dark to them, but it's it's that kind of dark that there's a reason for it. It's not just gratuitous.
Right.
But yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Well, let's talk about Paragons a minute. So
Okay.
where did the idea for these characters and the scenario I don't know, where did it come from? Like, when did you start putting the pieces together and this story kind of fully form in your mind?
The seeds of the setting that ended up in the book, once again, actually grew out of a campaign that I ran for my gaming buddies. I had done something that was similar, and I knew I needed to kind of tweak it and polish it up for a novel. But essentially, it initially grew out of a friend of mine and I were talking about gaming, and we were talking about we'd never run anything like in ancient Egypt. And we got to talking about Egyptian mythology and how the Egyptians back then, what we call mythology, they called religion. And we started talking about how they could come up with the crazy stuff that they came up with for their religion. And then I started thinking about, people can see something, and if they don't have an explanation, they're going to find one that makes sense to them. So then I thought, well, what if those mythical characters were real, but there was a non-mythological reason for what they'd seen, people like Hercules and Artemis and things like that. What if these guys were real, but people just made up stories to explain the things they could do? But there was another explanation that was the actual one that didn't involve magic or anything like that. And so I came up with the Veiled World. And that was essentially that some of these mythological characters were real, but the reason they could do the things they could do is because 10, 20,000 years before that, some extra dimensional aliens had come in back when we were still living in caves and trees and whatnot. They had mucked around with our DNA, and that mucking around eventually got relegated to the junk DNA. And through a certain sort of circumstances, that junk DNA can get reactivated, and you end up becoming what we call a paragon, which is someone who basically has superpowers. And around about the formation of the United States and that kind of, well, it was actually further back than that. Oh, it was when Vlad the Impaler was a paragon, and he actually raised an undead army and tried to take over that part of was it Eastern Europe, I think. Yeah, and so when that happened, all the world governments got together and said, you know what, we need to put a cap on this. We need to keep this stuff secret. So they created this, what they call the Veil, which is basically just a big agreement between all the world governments that they're going to use conspiracies and lies and whatnot to keep these people who have been awakened or activated out of the general public eye, and basically try to keep if somebody rises with power like that again, to keep them contained so that, it doesn't turn into the kind of thing they had to deal with Vlad. So I think I'm meandering away from answering your question, but that's the basic idea of where the Paragons trilogy comes from, is that modern day America today, Paragons start rising again, and people have to deal with that. So
if you take a little ancient Egyptian mythology and put a little pseudoscience, and then give me an Illuminati ripoff, I'm all in.
That you're close, pretty close.
Yeah, that's it's kind of weird, but the more scientific discoveries we make, and the more that we can kind of explain the world, I think, and we take a little bit of the magic out of kind of where we come from and what got us here and all that, the more that people love to have a little escapism in their history, and I love it. Those are some of my favorite books, and I'll catch myself laughing as I read sometimes, because I ought not love it so much, but I do. And I love the whole premise of what you come up with.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons when fantasy is so popular now. Because people like the ideas of the werewolves and monsters and all this stuff being real, but being, but driving around in convertibles and going to Starbucks and, that mystery and magic.
Yeah, well, it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, that why so many of us want to start with epic fantasy and stuff. I think it's because we want to believe that there's something more, that there's that we are special, that we're not just kind of riding on this ball through space.
Right.
That there's a little something more going on in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think. I mean, if you just look around at the world and you take the possibility of things like that out of it, it's not that encouraging a lot of times. I mean, and I think people need it. It kind of comes down to hope. You hope there's something bigger. You hope that there's something you haven't figured out. So there's a mystery to solve. There's a new land to discover. Even in science fiction, you see that. Like I write a space opera series, and most of that is just about what could happen. It's that forward momentum of society trying to just push further and learn more and find the thing they don't know yet. I think people need that. I really do.
Well, and Chuck, when you turn on the news and you see that our world leaders, whether you're right, left, in the middle, wherever, you can't trust any of them, and they're all lying to you. There's always some sort of real legit conspiracy going on, where people are trying to do people wrong constantly.
Absolutely.
It's kind of fun to just kind of get away from that. And,
I
see
cannot agree more.
There are some people, there are some stories where there's an actual hero and they're trying to do something. And, yeah.
Yeah. And for a long time, you had these darker things like, Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and stuff. And I'm not knocking that stuff at all. There's some very well done storytelling, but there's not a lot of hope. There's not a lot of the good guys winning and the bad guys going to jail or whatever. It's kind of telling everybody, yep, life sucks, and that's where you are.
Right.
I don't really, if I want that, I'll watch the news. Thanks.
Exactly. Did you envision Paragons as a trilogy to begin with?
Yes. I actually tend to think in trilogies.
Okay.
That I don't know. I'm very much a rule of three kind of guy,
Okay.
and I like trilogies because it's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I like what guys like Raymond Feist and Terry Brooks did with their world. They had, Terry Brooks had Shannara and Raymond Feist had, Midland, something like that, I can't remember. But, they would have these big settings and they would write trilogies with different characters within that same setting.
Right.
And I always thought that was really smart because that way you could do fresh stories, but at the same time it's still very accessible to the readers because they're coming back to the world they recognize. So I've always tended to think in terms of trilogies. It didn't work out so well for me on this space opera thing that I'm working on because I had originally planned it to be a trilogy, and I got about halfway through book 2 and realized there's no way in hell I'm going to tell this whole story in 3 books. So now it's actually going to become an anthology, and I've got like 5 books planned before I actually wrap up the stories. That particular story. So, I do tend to think in trilogies. And Paragons, absolutely, I knew that was going to be a trilogy right out of the gate.
Did as being your first, was this the first novel that you had written?
I have closet novels.
Okay, all right.
I have 4 closet novels and about a good jillion words worth of essays and short stories and burn poetry and just all kinds of stuff.
Right. So how long did it take to finish the Paragons trilogy?
The whole trilogy, I'm gonna say a year and a half, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not a super fast writer. I try to get 1,000 words every day, 7 days a week when I'm like in draft mode. I work every day, but sometimes my work is like planning a new novel, doing research on characters or settings or whatever. Because I do have a little bit of a planning phase before I start drafting. But I think it took a little less than a year and a half, something like that.
I'm kind of a burst writer where I may not physically write for several days, maybe sometimes a couple of weeks, but I'm kind of turned the story over in my head constantly. Yeah. And Hugh Howey talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago when he was on that he does an outline, but he kind of walks around with the story in his head and just plays it over and over and over again until it's a real understanding of the characters
right.
and how they're going to react to the situation. And then when you sit down, you're just kind of, recounting what's already been, the movie that's already been played in their head.
I get that. I like to have, because things occur to me, but I don't trust my 50-year-old brain. So I'll have to write down like this scene, so I always start with pen and paper, notebook and a pen. That's the beginning of every one of my books. And I'll write down like 5 plot points and know I want to hit by the end of the story. And that way I've always got this thing that I'm moving towards. I call them plot targets. But I'll do like you're talking about with Hugh Howey. It's like, okay, I'll think about how I'm going to get there. What's the first chapter going to be? What's, what needs to happen between the first word on the page and that first plot point, that sort of thing. And a lot of times there's a lot of blank staring, just kind of letting it play out before I actually put it on paper. So I get what he's saying there.
Yeah. So the Paragons was your first foray to KDP and self-publishing?
It was, yes.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you, taking this novel that you had written and sending it out into the world?
KP was awesome in that the only rejection I had to worry about getting was on my sales numbers. But I think the biggest thing for me was I did not fully grasp how much of a business mindset I was going to need if I wanted to make any money with these books. And, that was a big learning curve. The idea now that I've done, I think I've got 6 books up now. The idea of sending a manuscript off to an agent or an editor, waiting 6-8 months to hear back and probably hear no, that doesn't work for me. There's the option to do it myself is just too attractive and too lucrative, to be perfectly honest with you, from what I'm hearing about contracts these days. Potentially lucrative, let me put it that way. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I liked it. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, well, KDP offers the solid mid-listers a way to actually make some
Exactly.
money.
And
we all know superstars that, of course, have a great publishing story, but that's not the story for everybody. And I've said it time and time again that this is the best time for writers to be writing because you actually have choices.
I couldn't agree more.
Sometimes the book dictates that you go one way or the other. Maybe there's a particular audience that's better served through self-publishing, or more accessible through self-publishing, and maybe if you're doing something more literary, maybe a traditional route's the way to go. But the whole point is that you, as the author, have that choice.
Exactly.
You're in control.
Yeah.
And I wholeheartedly, support the author's choice to do what's best for them, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it is absolutely a great time to be a writer, and I think you're absolutely correct about there is still a place for the traditional world. It's just like you said, mid-listers. You go into the bookstore these days, and it's either names or not at all. Back in I remember back when I was doing it, you could go in the bookstore and look at the science fiction fantasy section, and there would be just exactly the middle shelves. That's kind of the mid-list. Those were the guys that. Yeah, you kind of heard of them, and it's probably a good book, but they weren't the big sellers. But they were still, these guys could still make a living, and it got to a point where that wasn't happening anymore. Because the houses, they're always looking for those next big lightning strike kind of things.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because, I've talked to a lot of folks that have been in publishing a long time, and they kind of lamenting that, it used to be the case that you would sign on with a publisher and they just understood that you weren't going to really be a name until maybe your third book or something.
Right.
And they would really, invest in the author, and, they think they can't afford to do that anymore. They better get lightning or not.
Yeah,
moved on to the next one.
They don't nurture like they used to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
They just don't.
That's okay because we've got this great indie community that's helping to nurture each other. And
I will say something about the indie community. Like I said, I've been in lots of different professions over the years, but these are some of the most supportive, rising tide lifts all ships kind of attitude of any group of people I've ever seen. I mean, the indie community in general is just, even when somebody kind of gets discouraged and wants to complain about something, it's always upbeat. It's always positive. It's always you can do it. And let me give you a tip on how kind of thing. That's kind of where my podcast came from. Because when I got into this, I've always been of the opinion you need to read the real good books that are doing well. You also need to find that book down on the bottom shelf that's got a lot of dust on it and blow the dust off of that and read that and see why it's not doing so well. You got to read the good and the bad if you want to learn. And when I first got into indie publishing, I did that. I went into KP and I picked out some books that were at the bottom of the list because I want to see why were they down there? Because this is supposed to be so lucrative and so great. And I found a lot of stories that I felt had they had the bones of a really good book to them, but the person writing them hadn't developed their craft to the point that they could because to me, art has always been about you feel something, you choose an artistic medium, and you transfer that feeling into the consumer of that medium. And in the case of storytelling, like if I'm writing an exciting adventure scene, I want my readers to like excited. I want that feeling to cross. And those people hadn't honed their craft to the point where they could do that. So I decided, well, I've been doing this a long time. I'll do this podcast thing because I listen to them all the time, and I'll maybe give some tips to people who are starting out to try and help them get to that point. So. But I love the community in general. That was my point.
And the the whole thing about when the tide rises, all boats float. I think what we have come to understand is that we're not competing with each other for readers. We're competing with all the other distractions, the YouTube and the Netflix and all that, and getting people to read. Period is a win for all of us.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, it's kind of silly to consider you're competing with each other because it takes us months to write a book. It takes a reader a day to consume it. So this week he'll read mine, next week he'll read yours, and It's really we're all in this together kind of thing.
So tell me about Story Shots podcast. Where did this come from, and what is your goal with the podcast?
Well, like I said, it came from the idea that I saw a lot of books on Amazon, ebooks from indie that I thought had really good bones for stories, but the craft just wasn't there. And the SPP guys, Johnny, Sean, and Dave over at Sterling & Stone, they were doing a little podcast called The Smarter Artist. It was like 5 to 8 minutes, and it was just a tip on writing and publishing. And they put out a call to guest hosts, and I thought, man, what the hell? This might be a chance for me to throw some of those tips out there that I was wanting to give folks. And I think I did 5 of them, and I enjoyed it. I'd never done any kind of radio or anything like that, but I just kind of liked having the mic and just talking and kind of throwing myself out there. So when they decided to mothball the Smarter Artist podcast, I thought, well, there's a little short slot there. I'll just fill it up with little shots on storyteller's craft and writer's lifestyle. And, I make them about 10 or 15 minutes long. And really my goal is just, I want to encourage folks who want to write to do so. And I want to give them the things I've learned through, 40 years of doing it, the little tips and tricks I've picked up to help them do it. But I don't want to blow sunshine up their skirt. Okay. One thing I always try to press is like, look, this is work. You can plot, you can plan, you can do all this stuff, but at some point you got to shut up and write. And that's the part I think, I've been in writers groups and critique groups and just things all across the country over the years. And that's where a lot of people kind of stall out is they have a great outline. They have a great plan. They want to talk about it. They want to tell you about it. But if you ask them how many words they got done that week, they kind of just stare at you blankly. And so I want to encourage people to actually do the work, to get from once upon a time to the end and have a finished thing in their hands. So really, that's the goal in a nutshell, is just to help folks get a book written.
And it's a fantastic podcast. I encourage everybody to go subscribe to it today. Go to iTunes, leave a review, because we need more people doing the stuff that you're doing, Chuck. It's awesome. And I know, if you're like me, the more you do something like that, the more you learn. One of the great ways to learn is to help teach somebody else to do something. And, there's all kind of little great revelations that come to you, in the midst of, kind of digging to try to help somebody else. It's a fascinating thing that happens.
Yeah, I try to have fun with it. Like I said, I've never really done anything with the whole microphone recording go, but I try to just have a little fun with it and open up a little bit, cut loose, try and keep it genuine. At one point I even recorded one of my stories and read it as a bonus episode just for fun. I had insomnia one night and I was like, man, what the hell? I'll just do this. It'll be all right.
Yeah, I love it. Everybody go subscribe. You talked about the space opera series that you're working on, the Cordova series, and the Race Cordova series. These books are freaking gorgeous.
Thanks.
They're phenomenal, and I love what you're doing. I love the the tone that you've got. What is your hope for this series? And I think you said you're going to expand it to 5 books.
Yeah, it's going to be 5 books. I'm working on the 3rd one right now. The idea behind Brace and Crew, I wanted to just write, a lot of people are writing like the hard science, and I had been watching, the thing on Sci-Fi. It came from the James S.A. Corey novels, but it was kind of in that, The Expanse. Thank you. It was kind of in that same vein that it was kind of dark and hardcore realistic. And, I wanted to write something that was a little more just good old fashioned space adventure, just like not pulpy, but just some interesting characters and some crazy situations with spaceships and, just a good solid space adventure like I read when I was a kid. Again, like I said, fun is rule 1. And so I came up with the Brace Cordova world, and it's basically like a Star Trek universe, but you take out all of the energy matter transference stuff. There's no teleporters, there's no replicators, none of that stuff. And they're still limited. They can't break light speed, so they do the whole hyperspace thing where they reach a certain speed, and then they shift over into this like middle dimension kind of deal. And then they shift out, and that middle dimension cuts down their travel time significantly. But it's mostly just about this guy who's a former military pilot, and the first book opens with him getting released from prison. He did a good thing, but he broke the law doing it, so he got thrown in prison. And he gets swept up with this crazy crew of smugglers, and they're going off looking for this ancient Earth relic. And just shenanigans ensue. And it's going to be 5 books worth of shenanigans because it all ties into what happens in book 1 by the end of book 5. So, but it's, like I said, it's just good space adventure. It's not, there's science in it, but it's not too crazy. And it's set far enough in the future that, I've got a lot of room for hand wavium there as I need it.
Right. Definitely what you said, Chuck. Fun is rule one in all of your books. I'm a huge fan. I love what you're doing. And
Thanks,
I'm a big
man.
fan of the podcast. Where can people find you, Chuck, if they want to dig into what you're doing? And by the way, he's C.Steven Manley online, as we mentioned up front. But where can people find you and kind of dig into all you're doing?
Well, probably the best place is going to be cstevenmanley.net. That's my website, and there's links to all the different books and the podcast and the different outlets for the podcast and everything from there. But you can also search up C. Steven Manley on Amazon. I'm currently exclusive to Amazon, but within the next month, I'm pulling some stuff out of KU. I'm going to start going wide with some books. So people who are on to iBooks and Nook and Kobo and all that will be able to have access to them.
Yeah, let's revisit after a while, and if you'd like to come report on what that experience was like for you and going wide and what it did for you. I'm always interested to see what people's experience is.
Hank, I'll be happy to do your show anytime,
Awesome. Bud. Well, thanks for joining me, Chuck. I appreciate it. We're going to send everybody to see you.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
He was just 7 when his parents died. Eliza received the news of their death on Halloween morning, but she kept it from Jason for 2 more days. She sent him out trick-or-treating. He was a vampire. He spun around in the living room, eyes wild, shouting, "I am the living dead!" and wondering why they didn't laugh. On November 2nd, after school, Eliza told him. His parents were dead. It was a bleak time. He wanted silence. He wanted darkness. He cried great rolling tears. In early spring, he ran away from home, which means he stole $5, put a box of Cheez-Its in a pillowcase, and walked 7 blocks. He slept in a field, glad to be miserable. He wanted to freeze to death, to be with his mom and dad, to not feel anything. His grandmother found him at a playground near the river, fallen in the dust with his shoulder against the slope of a teeter-totter, the other end riderless, suspended. He saw her trudging up the hill. She looked twice her usual size in her winter coat, and frightening. "Let's go home, Jason." He knew he was in trouble. He knew what home meant. It meant a paddling or worse. Eliza opened her big winter coat and, straining, slipped down into the dust next to him. She drew him into her warm body, wrapping him in the coat. She flipped the collar up, rubbed her hands together, and cupped them over his ears. "Brr, you're an ice cube. But it feels good, kinda. It's good to get really cold sometimes. Wakes you up." They were cheek to cheek against the teeter-totter, bundled together as the sky turned from gray to orange. The ground stung, but they sat a long time. "Why?" The word was just a tiny puff of vapor that slipped from his lips and into the wind. But it was also big and heavy. She knew what his little boy heart had asked. She understood the universe of longing and confusion and hurt in that one whispered word. "We all die, baby. In all the long, long history of the world, there's not been one of us who didn't." "I'll die," he said. It wasn't a question, but it was. "Yes, and I'll die. A lot sooner. And the why is just... it's just there. It just is. We're not around to see what was before us, and we're not here to see what happens after." The trees on the edge of the playground shivered with dawn. "But we're here now," she said, and pulled him tighter until his cheekbone felt sore from pressing against hers. "And it has to be enough. It has to be. Look at all we have now. Really look." He really looked. It was just a small playground off the main road of an unimportant New England town. But in the distance he could see the wide Kennebec River, and the sky was pink above it, He saw small ships moored, trimmed in red and baby blue, rocking against the current. He saw a robin on the railing of a dock, toes pointed inward, making occasional hops that were also flight. The town was waking up. There was a light in the bakery and one in the grocery. There was an empty can of beer on a picnic table and wildflowers by the road. There was wind and trees swaying gently. There was his own breath in his own lungs. There was his grandmother, her body, her heartbeat against his back as he leaned against her chest. There was his own life and hers, and a world to live them in. And it was enough.